That works.
Greetings and welcome to the weekly educational rounds at Sinclair. My name is Jim Ellermeyer and I'm a behavioral health therapist here at Sinclair, and today I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi, I'm Sierra. I'm a PA student from Chatham.
And I'm Ruth Ann Valentine, a psychotherapist, and I collaborate with Sinclair.
And as I'm sure most of you know by now, that Sinclair is a holistic integrative psychiatric facility where we mold mind, body, and spirit. And what we do is we look for platforms on which for people to grow into the person that they can be. What we like to have people to do is live their life out loud. And today we're joined by a special guest, Nancy Fitzgerald, and thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy. And
My
perhaps
pleasure.
perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'd be glad to do that. I have been a high school chemistry teacher, a research chemical engineer, and a facilitator. I helped a little bit at Sinclair with health and wellness as it got started, and now I am living for 6 months now in Massachusetts, where I am volunteering for the Teachers of God Foundation, which promotes courses about A Course in Miracles, online teachings based on A Course in Miracles.
Well, one of the things here at Sinclair is that perhaps we're a little bit more of a unique type of facility, as then when a patient comes in and presents with anxiety, presents with depression, or some type of other struggle in their life, we don't paint that person as depression. We don't paint that person as anxiety. We view them as a beautiful, pure, inner-spirited being who happens to have some other struggles in their life. So that's like where we start. And what we like to do is offer enhancements to people's life. And what you're talking about, the faith-based aspect, the spirituality aspect of wellness is something that is quite often overlooked in our Western society. And I'd like to get your views on that, and also I'd like to hear from my dear friend Ruth Ann on how she incorporates that into her therapy.
Well, thank you. I think A Course in Miracles can be a wonderful support for either therapists or patients, or both together. It is a spiritual psychotherapy, self-study. It really is a course. It has a text of almost 700 pages, a workbook which has 365 lessons. The workbook first takes you through kind of an undoing of your thinking, and then rebuilds it in terms of claiming your self-worth and your identity, your true self, and teaching you how to recognize the thoughts that basically are in the way of you understanding that you are love and that you are worthwhile and wonderful. And so either the therapist or the patient can make good use of A Course in Miracles.
Nancy, when you say undoing, what is it that the Course in Miracles provides for the reader? What are you undoing?
Well, actually, it's our thought system. It says that we get to challenge all the thoughts that we currently have, and it turns out any thought that feeds into my feeling anything but joy and happiness, so any thought that promotes anxiety or fear or depression or anger, is a thought that is basically clutter in the way of knowing who my true self is and living and giving the kind of thing that I'm called to do in this life.
Also, Nancy, in the Course of Miracles, the client-therapist relationship, is it viewed as equal, that both client and patient are both teacher and learner simultaneously?
Yes, absolutely. There's several different ways of expressing that mutuality, of essentially claiming our oneness. And so I am both the therapist and the patient if I sit down with someone to have an interchange. And if I'm the therapist, it turns out that the lesson is actually for me as well. That person that in front of me, the Course refers to that person as my brother. My brother is saying something, bringing up something that in some way is my concern, my issue, because I've projected that person in front of me to speak to me. And so now I'm hearing and listening and speaking from a guided place.
And so, Nancy, it really becomes a healing environment.
Absolutely. It's a deliberate letting go of my being in charge and trying to get out of the way, to listen, to hear what is said, and then to respond in a way that I'm guided as I go. There's actually a separate supplement for A Course in Miracles called Psychotherapy, Purpose, Process, and Practice. Maybe you can see the cover of this little separate booklet. It's also now in the new 3rd edition of A Course in Miracles. It's included right with the big bound issue.
Thank you, Nancy. The last time you and I talked, you talked about some studies, scientific studies that are, I think, relevant to what we're speaking about.
True. As a scientist and experimenter, it was awesome to me when I found Larry Dossey's book called Healing Words. It documents from 1993 over 100 scientific studies that prove the power of prayer or intentional focus on healing by one person for another. That works even at a distance, and if the person who's being attended to doesn't even know that the prayer or attention is being sent their way. So that's one thing, that there is scientific documentation for the power in healing for prayer, for intended support for another. There's also Ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian tradition. I understand that it was documented in a case study by Dr. Hugh Len. He was, I think, a psychiatrist who was assigned to a criminal for mentally ill, a ward for mentally ill criminals. And when he got there, all the staff expected that he would be run out of town quickly. They didn't last long. The staff spent a lot of time on sick leave. Their paint didn't stick to the walls. The patients were in chains and weren't to be trusted hardly even in the hall when the staff passed them. Dr. Len didn't seem to be doing anything. He spent time in his office, and after a month or two, there was a patient who could be taken out of chains, and a little bit longer the paint could be repaired and things got a little brighter. And a little bit later, some of the prisoners were allowed to go outside and play volleyball. It was a gradual change, and it turns out that when he was asked what he was, quote, doing, he was sitting in his office reading the files of the patients until something resonated with him, and he would take responsibility for healing the part of himself that helped cause that illness in that patient and focus on allowing himself to be cleared of whatever it was that added to that problem. So I don't know that tradition nearly as well as A Course in Miracles, but it turns out that after 3 or 4 years, that ward was shut down. There were so many of the patients who improved and were located other places that just a handful of them needed to be placed specially, and the ward was actually closed.
So Nancy, in that study, I mean, I'm intrigued by that study. As the interior heart of that physician, the psychiatrist, changed, it energetically reached out to the inmates.
Yes, the inmates and the whole institution, the atmosphere for the staff and the inmates and the other people. Yes, it was his deliberate joining with forgiveness, you might say. Course in Miracles defines forgiveness a little more broadly and a little less like what we do generally. Instead of seeing something that's done wrong and forgiving it, it teaches you to look with that the eyes that Jim described earlier, of seeing that person as a beautiful spirit and light and brother, and basically overlooking what's there, focusing instead on the good true self of that person.
Well, quite often, Nancy, we deal with people who are troubled, people who are angry, bitter, full of resentment, and quite often I'll ask them to begin to replace maybe some of their harsh words with, it's kind of a Buddhist philosophy, it's called wow, it's called wishing others well. And I've often found that when you're wishing others well, even though it may come out through gritted teeth for a while, it's very difficult to have a hard heart when you're wishing someone well.
Yes, yes. A Course in Miracles is fairly clear-cut about there only being two choices, love or fear. Fear expresses itself in many ways, and love expresses itself in joy and happiness and peacefulness. But if you are in peacefulness, you're right. There's really not room. You cannot focus on both at the same time, and you can't be fully committed to anger at the same time you think you're committed to love. So you're always training yourself to notice, where am I? Whoops, did I just go to judgment? Did I just go to anger? Choosing in your head to say, whoops, I don't want to do that. I'm letting it go. I'm releasing it. I'm choosing instead to focus on love, happiness, joy.
Well, allowing people to take the choices back into their lives is a subject for about 10 more sessions. However, what I'd like to do is, on my left here is Sierra. She's a physician's assistant, intern, and she's taking her psychiatric rotation here. And of course, she comes from the Western world of allopathic medicine. And I'd like to get Sarah's views on some of the things we do here and what Nancy was speaking about.
Yeah, so I go to Chatham. I'll graduate in July, hopefully, fingers crossed. But we don't discuss things like this in school. You know, it's more, you have hypertension, so I'm going to give you this medication, and I'm going to tell you why it's working because we've seen this. Whereas spirituality and talking out your problems isn't something that we really discuss. You know what I mean? Because if we're not prescribing things, we may be out of a job. You know, it's not, you know, let's sit down and actually discuss what might be the root of your problem. Let's give you this medication and then this medication, and there's nothing wrong with medications in some cases, but, you know, as far from a psychiatric standpoint goes, maybe the answer is not always a medication.
Well, molecules are wonderful. Our thoughts are that molecules can be a wonderful bridge. Molecules can be a place where we can start that platform. However, to rely on them solely, and Nancy, what we like to view here, especially myself, I view my patients as time travelers into the past and into the future with brief layovers in the present. And what we try to do is have them understand that, and this is a 12-step thing, that it's in the present that the divine, the creator, higher power, puts people, places, things, circumstances, and events into your life. And if you're there, present and aware to witness them, then they might have some meaning for you. And I'm going to shut my mouth for a bit. However, before that, I'm going to ask the PA students what time it is. Say it out loud.
Right now.
It's right now, and it's always right.
All right. All right. Well, that certainly dovetails very well with the message of A Course in Miracles. The past is gone and the future isn't here. So now is the time that we get to choose and be and live, and that certainly matches. It's also true that a lot of we found that a lot of people who have a lot of years under their belt in the 12-step process are finding A Course in Miracles a good next step. That it extends, it stretches, it asks for more, and it's really saying this is the whole way home. You know, this is the way back to finding out who you really are, to claiming your true creator self with a capital S, and being able to live from that place in conjunction with people all around you as brothers, sisters.
Nancy, there's a common thread that runs through all these modalities, and it's that we often get in our own ways, and we are experts at complicating our lives when our lives can become so much more simpler. Could you talk a little bit about that?
How we simplify our lives. Well,
How can we?
how can we? I guess in my experience with A Course in Miracles, it's helped a great deal to be taught to be able to choose between what the Course refers to as the ego system or the love side. My ego mind is the one that wants to be in control, thinks I can take vengeance, has a little temper tantrum when something doesn't go my way, and all those things do not make me feel good. So my simple question is, how do I feel? Am I in love or am I in ego right now? Well, if I'm irritated, angry, defending myself mentally or otherwise, I'm in ego. And if I instead say, whoops, step back, take care of this for me, let me see this differently. So it doesn't mean that I have the answer. It means I'm willing to pause and see what else can come to me. It becomes a way of tapping into my inner teacher, which is another thing that the Course in Miracles says that its goal is to help some people find a way to work with their own inner teacher. We all have it. A lot of us have buried it and don't recognize it when it's talking to us.
And how receptive has the medical community been to your thoughts?
I don't know that we have gone after the medical community per se. I think my first experience with trying to interact with a medical setting, and I know it's a friendly one compared to a lot of the Western medical training, as Sierra describes it, with a lot of the medication mode as opposed to any other kind of support for healing.
Well, you were speaking earlier about a couple of research studies, and of course we want to look at something that has some efficacy behind it and some results, some solid results.
Yes, it does help in the scientific world to have experimental kinds of data that help you say, okay, I'm allowed to look at this. That was part of how I got into A Course in Miracles. I thought, oh, I'll just read this and see what it says. So as a researcher, as somebody who was taking a look at what was there, well, I realized within a couple of chapters that I would not read this without having it affect me, even reading it through once, and that the truth of it resonated so thoroughly that was the proof. Now, the other part of experimentation for me was to actually try the ideas out in my life. I studied A Course in Miracles for many years before I was kicked to a new level of actually making them my own, like trying them, really doing it, as opposed to reading about them to practice it. And it's a very practical book. It does have some theory, but it emphasizes the practical, including the workbook lessons.
I'm interested to know how a person with your background in chemistry and chemical engineering became interested and involved and enmeshed in A Course of Miracles.
I guess my entree was from a college friend who way back when we were in college used to say something like, we need a new version of the Bible. This one is just too outdated. She found A Course in Miracles before I did and would mention it, write about it, whatever, probably 10 years before I got started. Once I retired early from Alcoa and had lots of choice time on my hands, I decided, okay, it's time for me to find out what this is. So when I went to my first Course in Miracles group, they were reading aloud in chapter 23, and a lot of it made absolutely no sense to me. And I thought, oh, well, the reason is it's chapter 23. Well, maybe not, maybe, but it let me keep going. And it turns out sometimes it takes a while to have your resistance fall enough to hear what's being said. But the attraction was so large for me that I had to keep going back. I wasn't like some people to be able to do it all in one slug, read the whole book, start right in. I did it in small bites for a long time. And then when I got my kick 4 years ago, it's like now it feels like it's going much faster.
So could you share with us what your involvement in this has meant to you in your personal life, on a personal level? How your outlook on life in the world?
Well, I think I spend a whole lot more of my time in a peaceful place when I get on the phone and I have the the complete runaround of phone messages and press this and do that and ask this and da 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 da. I have a place to start that says, okay, this is all a game. It's okay, however it turns out. I'm just going to connect to that person that I end up talking to eventually, and remember that they're doing the best they can, and I'm doing my job, and they're doing theirs. My son, unsolicited, a couple years back, said in response to my comment that, well, I think I'm actually doing a little better. Yeah, Mom, I meant to say something to you. I think you're just a lot calmer than you used to be. So, a son-mother relationship, which is actually wonderful now, but which had its trials in the teenage years. And when that son can now say to me that he sees the difference, then I'm thinking it's not just the way I feel, but it is that, and it's also the way other people experience me.
And it's quite often that other people notice the change in you before you see it yourself.
Yes.
I'm going to ask Ruth Ann for her thoughts.
Thank you, James. Nancy, you mentioned earlier about our thoughts, and as we move away from our cluttered thinking, away from fear and towards peace and love, that inner calm happens. And I have found that in my own life on a personal level and also on a professional level. And as a result, my work is a lot more fun and enjoyable. And indeed, the person sitting across from me is my teacher. And I learned that in the Course of Miracles, and there are many conversations, Nancy. And so I really appreciate you bringing your expertise here, and your friend Sandy, who sits in front of us at the panel, because there is a wealth of knowledge in the Course in Miracles that is so applicable to the healthcare system, and it is simply your heart being open to be a learner as well as a teacher, and that in itself creates the healing environment for something wonderful and beautiful to happen.
Yes, it does. And I have to say that I appreciate you as a friend being willing to sample A Course in Miracles so that we had common ground there. I know your grounding is Catholicism in both a religious and a small C way. You're very open to all paths, and I appreciate that we have been able to share our paths, even though you would not necessarily think so based on the external description of where we each started.
Yes, and Nancy, just to include a personal note, and this is from the Course of Miracles, you knew there was a time in my life whenever I was preparing and studying for my dissertation, and then one day, out of the clear blue, you offered, "Can I type for you?" And that began my whole process of completing my dissertation. And you were an essential part in making that a possibility. And I give the Course of Miracles credit for that.
Well, thank you, because that just sort of popped out of my mouth, and I didn't know it was coming, and I didn't know what it meant at the time. But I think I'm supposed to volunteer to help you.
And you did.
Any comments, questions, or concerns from our assembled multitude?
Sandy, any comments or questions?
I'm so thrilled to be here and talk about no coincidences, and I'm hearing your message, and it's resonating so deeply in my heart. I actually got a tear in my eyes a couple times. It's like, this is such a wonderful experience to be here. I'm so thrilled. This is just a wonderful place. I'm like, wow, thank you. This is what a great day. I wasn't expecting this.
And Sandy runs a Course in Miracles group near the physical location of Seclair, but there are groups, Course in Miracles groups that can be found online. If you type in A Course in Miracles, find a group, there are lists of places all over the country where they offer ongoing support. It is a self-study program, and it also helps to know other people are on the path with you and to share as you go.
Perhaps if you could, Nancy, how interested individuals perhaps could reach out to you and or be connected with the Course on Miracles? Yes,
you can reach me at my email address, nmeyer, M-E-Y-E-R, Fitz, F-I-T-Z, at yahoo.com. And also, the organization that I am volunteering with now, I might have an email address there. You could probably catch me indirectly there. It's the Teachers of God Foundation. It's teachersofgod.org online. It offers a 40-day free online course that is the one that was the basis for me making a step change, increase in the way I'm able to live and practice A Course in Miracles.
Very nice, very nice. Well, it was so wonderful and so gracious for you to appear by magic with us today.
Yes,
and,
that's what I consider. Thank you. Thank you. My great pleasure. I appreciate it greatly.
Thank you, Nancy.
And,
thank you all.
And we'd like to invite everyone to continue to come to each week. Every Monday we broadcast live. You can also catch past episodes either on video or on audio at iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spreaker.
And
Like
the name of
You can go under, and you can always reach us view at www.seclaire, that's SECLAIRER.com. Look under blogs, and everything's there, more than you want to know. We'd certainly appreciate everyone joining us today, and as usual we always have a free prescription to give out, and that would be fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and perhaps take up fishing. And as I always say, for a real mindful experience, you could fish without bait. And as always, we ask you to be good to yourself, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.